Simba and his dopey companions are out hunting for bugs, because he's a lion, he shouldn't be eating bugs, for crying out loud, but they're easy. And so you see this scene where Pumbaa goes after this bug, and then another lion shows up and chases him. So she's going to kill him and eat him. And see, that's an interesting thing, because one of the things that happens, I suppose you could think about this, one of the things that happens in late adolescence is that the formation of male gangs is often broken up by the proclivity of one or more members of that gang to get involved in an individual romantic relationship. And so the idea that the female lion is the carnivore, the female is the carnivore that will devour the group, is exactly right. And so what a girl will do often if she's in a relationship with somebody like a young man or an older adolescent is she'll try to separate him from his dopey friends, and no wonder, why wouldn't she do that? Because he does have dopey friends, and it'd be better for him if he could get beyond them. And so anyways, they're pretty freaked out about this. And so then Simba goes out and has a fight with this lion to protect his dopey chums, and I'm sure you don't need any explanation about what that means.
Jeez, why do I always have to save your... Don't worry, buddy, I'm here for you. Everything's gonna be okay. Get her, bite her head. Go for the jugular, the jugular. See, I told you he'd come in handy. Nala?
They have this huge fight, and Nala, who it turns out to be, pins him. And so that goes back to the beginning of the story, where when he first encountered her, she pinned him all the time. She's an anima figure, right? And now what she does immediately is shame him. So he's an anima figure in part. She's an anima figure in part because she actually does shame him, right? So she's the gateway to higher consciousness. She makes him self-conscious, and rightly so. But she's also a psychological figure, because imagine that when a young man is establishing a relationship with a young woman, and he's enamored of her, he's falling in love, he projects an ideal onto her, and that ideal is going to be partially fulfilled by the relationship. The degree to which is unspecified, and sometimes it'll collapse completely. But he projects an ideal onto her, because otherwise he wouldn't be attracted to her, and then the ideal judges him. And so that makes him feel all self-conscious and useless, which is useful because he is useless and should feel that way. And so it's part of the impetus to growing up. You need necessity in order to mature you, because to mature is to take on responsibility, and you're not going to feel that impetus unless adopting the responsibility has some sort of payoff. And women tend to mate across and up dominance hierarchies, so they tend to actually like men who are useful. And so if they encounter a man who isn't useful at all, that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to not be happy about that in the least. And no wonder, and I think the reason for that, it's an economic and a biological reason. The reason is that women are in the position of having to take care of infants primarily. And an infant is a very heavy load. And so even a woman who's extraordinarily competent is going to find herself substantially limited in her possibilities if she has an infant. And so then she's looking around for someone who'll pick up part of the load. It's perfectly reasonable, and you're not going to pick up part of the load if you're completely useless. And so it's in the woman's best interest not to have 2 children, roughly speaking. So anyway, she pins him, and then he's all resentful about it immediately, because she's calling him on his stupid friends and the fact that he's out there gallivanting impulsively in paradise when there's real problems to be solved. And so look at him, he's all resentful and useless, and feeling put upon and picked upon, and you got to slap him again fundamentally. And she's just completely stunned by that. It's like, and tells him, where's the Simba I used to know, right? He's a little doubtful about the whole situation there. The animators do a very nice job of this part of the movie, because one of the things you see is that his eyebrows are always pointing up in the middle, whereas his father's eyebrows were pointing down in the middle. And so that's the difference between this, which is sort of like things are happening to me, and this, which is more like I'm imposing my will on things. And that's an immature face, and the animators capture that brilliantly. So here's where she shames him again. She tells him how much she liked him when he was little, and a potential king, and how hurt she is that he's this useless wide-eyed, naive, impulsive, pleasure-seeking adolescent. And she tells him that she missed him. And God only knows why, because look at him again. It's like completely appalling creature. And this is when Pumbaa and Timon sing that song about the fact that, their friend's doomed because, this girl's got him. And then they switch into another archetypal scene, and so they're falling in love here. And so the paradisal imagery is really highlighted in the movie. And so they go off and have this like romp, self-reflective romp through this new paradise. And they wrestle around and play. And then he pins her more or less, and she licks him. That's not so good.
With all this living faith, can you feel the love tonight? You needn't look too far.
And this is one of the most brilliant shots, I think, that the animators managed, because she's obviously pushing this a little bit farther than he knows what to do with. And so they're wrestling, and she licks him, and then she lays down and makes this face, which is, every single class I've ever showed this to, all laugh when they see that image. And that's a good example. So Freud said that jokes were a good route into the unconscious. So the question is, and this is an archetypal facial expression, and everyone knows exactly what it means. There's something sexually seductive about it, something very sexually seductive about it, despite the fact that it's a lioness. And the animators do an extraordinarily good job of capturing that. And so that has a huge effect on him. Well, these guys know that like, the game's up, man. It's like they know they're dead. Whatever attractions they can offer are paling in comparison to this. So anyways, things don't really progress past that, but he gets a hint of her longing for him, what's waiting for him if he grows up, and the fact that she's completely disappointed in him because he's so completely useless. And so now he's lounging about, like some basement dweller with Cheeto dust all over his chest, and trying to justify his absolutely useless life, and saying that he doesn't have any responsibility to the devastated kingdom, and he's out there where Hakuna Matata, I can just do whatever I want and follow my impulsive pleasures. And she thinks he's pretty pathetic, and the reason for that is because he is actually pretty pathetic. And she tells him that she's extraordinarily disappointed, and he gets all pouty about it. I mean, even here you see when he's got kind of an aggressive look on his face, there's still nothing about it that's commanding. It's petulant, right? It's like, well, now I'm irritated, but he's got no force, and still completely appalling in this particular situation. So she judges him very harshly and leaves, and that makes him think. He gets all self-conscious because this female that he admires wants to have nothing to do with him, and so he's, first of all, then he thinks, well, maybe I'll just hate all women, which is, pretty pathetic conclusion, but a very common one. And the next is, well, maybe there's actually something wrong with him, right? Which is a very painful bit of self-reflection. So he notes that there's something wrong with him, and then he calls out to his father and says, look, you said you were always going to be here for me, and you're not. And so what's happening is that he's become aware of the insufficiency of his current adolescent value structure, and he wants something beyond it, which would be associated with identification with the father. But he can't find the father. The father's dead. It's like when Pinocchio goes down to the bottom of the ocean to bring Geppetto up from the depths, right? That's the situation that Simba finds himself in right now. The father's gone and has to be brought up from the depths. So this is where the movie takes the archetypal pathway of an initiation ceremony. So he says he wants to change. Now, one of the things Carl Rogers, one of the clinicians that we'll talk about, pointed out was that if someone was going to come to psychotherapy, there's some things that had to happen before they went into psychotherapy. And one thing that had to happen was that they had to admit that there was something wrong, and they had to want to change. You had to have that before you went into the psychotherapeutic situation. And what happens here is Simba is actually, he's dropped his arrogance, and he's looking upward, kind of like Geppetto wishing on the star in Pinocchio. He's looking upwards, he's looking towards something higher, and he wants to transform himself. So he's asked the question, how can I change for the better? And he doesn't get an answer. And then Rafiki shows up. So what does that mean? It means that as soon as you know you're wrong about something, as soon as you admit that you're wrong about something, and you open the door to potential change, that part of you will respond. So, and you know this because, think about this. You're thinking. So you ask yourself a question, because that's what you do when you're thinking, and then you generate some answers. It's like, it's very strange. The thinking will actually work. You can actually come up with answers if you think about something. And so this issue is, okay, I thought I was real good in my little impulsive paradise, but then it turns out that I'm just a half-wit, and I noticed that, and I want to do something about it. So the question has now been posed, and what Jung would say is the deeper part of yourself, the part that still contains your undeveloped potential, will respond to that posed question and change the way that you look at things and change the way that you act. It'll start changing things so that you can tap those parts of yourself that are not yet developed. And you certainly do that in psychotherapy, but you can do that. Jung said that psychotherapy could be replaced by a supreme moral effort. And by that he meant was that if you really wanted things to be better, if you wanted to get your act together, and you admitted that you were insufficient in your current state, and you meditated on the issue and tried to figure out what you should do next to put yourself together, that you would be able to find out that there's something in you that guides the process of development. That's the self. It's the higher self in some sense. It's the thing that remains constant across transformations. You know, because you're somewhere, then you fall apart, then you get somewhere else. But there's something outside of that that's guiding that process. And that's also the self. That's what you could be. And you can communicate in some sense with what you could be.